On a freezing Thursday morning near the end of January, Madeline Carter stood on the front porch of a house she'd already decided was garbage. Snow blew sideways through the streets of Ashridge, Oregon, sticking to dead bushes, broken fences and mailboxes nobody bothered repainting anymore. The house behind her leaned slightly to one side like it was tired of standing. One upstairs window was boarded shut. Another kept rattling in the wind, loud enough to sound like it might fall out completely. Madeline looked at the man standing near the gate and asked, with a little laugh she didn't even try to hide, "Wait, you're actually serious about buying this place?" The two contractors behind her smirked immediately. The man didn't react. He just looked past her toward the house. Then he nodded once and started walking through the snow. 6 months later, people in Ashridge would slow down outside that same house just to stare at it, glowing warm under strings of yellow lights, while music drifted through the windows and kids laughed somewhere inside. And Madeline Carter, the woman who once called it a teardown waiting to collapse, would stand across the street wondering how she completely missed what was sitting right in front of her. But none of that existed yet. Right then, it was still just an old dying house at the end of Cedar Hollow Road. And Ethan Brooks was still just a tired man running out of money. Ethan was 33, though honestly he looked older sometimes. Grief does that to people. Makes them look worn down around the edges even when they're still young. He was tall, broad-shouldered, quiet. The kind of guy who looked like he'd spent most of his life lifting heavy things and fixing broken ones. His dark hair was getting too long again because haircuts stopped feeling important a while ago. There were pale scars across his knuckles from years of construction work. He wore an old brown canvas jacket faded from rain, dust, and sawdust. The sleeves had been patched twice already. His boots were cracked from Oregon winters. Most people probably wouldn't notice him in a crowded room, but Ethan noticed everything, especially houses, especially damaged ones. Before his wife got sick, Ethan used to run a small renovation business outside Portland, restoring old homes nobody wanted anymore. He liked old places, places with history, places people gave up on too early. Then Hannah got cancer, and over 2 years, hospital bills slowly swallowed almost everything they had. The business disappeared after that. The savings disappeared faster. By the time Ethan drove into Ashridge with his 8-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, he had exactly $8,412 left to his name. He knew the number because he checked it almost every night. Lily woke up when the truck stopped. She sat up slowly beneath a huge yellow winter coat that made her look even smaller than she already was. She had messy brown curls and big, observant eyes exactly like her mother's. She always carried a sketchbook around with her, even now. "What is it?" she asked sleepily. Ethan looked at the house for another second. "Maybe home." Lily stared through the windshield. Then she frowned a little. "It looks haunted." One of the contractors laughed out loud this time. Madeline stepped carefully across the porch, avoiding a section of wood that dipped under her boot. Madeline Carter was 40 years old and looked like someone who'd spent most of her life winning arguments. Tall, sharp-looking, perfectly dressed even in freezing weather. She wore a dark wool coat over expensive leather boots that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, despite the wind. People trusted Madeline because she sold confidence really well. She also had basically zero patience for emotional people. 3 years earlier, her husband left after what everyone in town politely called a rough marriage, though honestly most people thought Madeline's need to control everything eventually pushed him away. After the divorce, she got even colder, faster, less interested in pretending to care when she didn't. And she definitely didn't care about this house. This place has been empty almost 9 years, she said, while unlocking the front door. Owner died. Family fought over the property. Nobody wanted it after that. The door jammed halfway before she shoved it open with her shoulder. Cold air mixed with the smell of mold and old wood. Inside looked even worse. Wallpaper peeled off the walls in long, curling strips. Water stains spread across the ceiling. Part of the floor near the stairs dipped under Ethan's weight, hard enough to make one contractor mutter, "Jesus!" Somewhere upstairs, wind whistled through a broken window. Madeline folded her arms. "So?" she said casually. "Still thinking this is a smart idea?" Ethan didn't answer. He just walked slowly through the living room instead, touched the walls, checked the floorboards, looked carefully at the ceiling beams. The contractors exchanged looks behind him. To them, the place looked dead. To Ethan, it looked neglected. Big difference. Lily wandered quietly into the dining room while the adults talked. That's when she spotted the cat. Tiny orange thing curled beside an old radiator, probably less than a year old, thin enough to count its ribs. One ear bent awkwardly near the tip, like it healed wrong after a fight. The cat looked at Lily but didn't run. "Oh," Lily whispered softly. "Hi there." Madeline glanced over. "That cat's been hanging around here for weeks," she said. "Animal control couldn't catch it." Lily crouched lower. The cat kept staring at her. Meanwhile, Madeline kept listing problems as Ethan moved through the house. Roof damage. Bad pipes. Foundation issues. Electrical system probably needed replacing completely. Possible mold. Every sentence sounded expensive. Finally, they stopped in the kitchen. Snow tapped softly against the cracked windows. Madeline slid the paperwork folder across the counter. "I'm going to be honest," she said. "Most people wouldn't touch this place." Ethan looked down at the price. The house was cheaper than every apartment he'd looked at. Cheaper than another temporary rental, cheaper than starting over somewhere else. And sometimes survival makes decisions before hope gets a chance to. Madeline studied him for a second. Then she laughed lightly and asked, "You seriously want to raise a kid here?" The room got quiet fast. One contractor suddenly looked uncomfortable. Ethan finally looked up at her. Not angry, not embarrassed, just exhausted. "She'll have a roof," he said quietly. "That's enough right now." Something about the way he said it made even Madeline pause for half a second. Not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded practiced, like he'd repeated those words to himself many nights already. The paperwork took less than 20 minutes. When Ethan signed the final page, Madeline handed him the keys with a look somewhere between pity and disbelief. Outside, snow started falling harder. Lily stood beside the truck holding the orange cat, awkwardly, inside her coat. "Can we keep him?" she asked. Ethan looked at the shivering cat, then at the house, then back at Lily. "I guess he lives here too now." That night, after carrying the last box inside, Ethan sat on the freezing living room floor beneath a weak lantern while wind rattled through the walls. Lily had already fallen asleep wrapped in blankets beside the fireplace with the cat curled against her chest. For a while, Ethan just listened to the sounds of the house around him. Old wood creaking, pipes knocking softly, wind slipping through cracks in the walls. Then Lily shifted in her sleep and whispered quietly, "I think this house feels lonely." Ethan looked around the dark room. And somehow, even with everything broken inside it, he understood exactly what she meant. The first week inside the house felt colder than outside. Not because the heater didn't work, though it didn't, but because old houses held cold differently. The kind that settled into the walls and stayed there long after the sun came up. Every morning, Ethan woke before dawn wrapped in 2 jackets, hearing pipes knock somewhere behind the walls while wind moved softly through cracks in the wood. Ashridge looked grey most mornings in February. Wet streets, low clouds, coffee shops opening before sunrise for logging crews, and construction workers heading out toward the highway. The kind of town where people noticed new faces immediately but pretended they didn't. By the second week, people had already started referring to Ethan as the guy who bought the Cedar Hollow house, usually with concern, sometimes with amusement. Ethan spent his days working renovation jobs across town, small repairs mostly, broken cabinets, flooring, water damage, whatever paid quickly. Then, every evening, he drove back to Cedar Hollow exhausted, changed clothes in the freezing downstairs bathroom, and worked on his own house until sometime past midnight. Lily usually fell asleep downstairs beside the fireplace with the orange cat curled against her stomach. The cat stayed. Ethan never officially agreed to keep him, but the animal slowly started behaving like he owned the place. Lily named him Marmalade because of his colour, though Ethan mostly called him that cat. He was skinny, stubborn, and missing half his tail, probably from an old accident. Somehow, he always appeared exactly where work was happening, sitting nearby like he was supervising repairs. One night around 11, Ethan stood in the downstairs hallway pulling old water-damaged panels from the wall beside the staircase. The wood practically came apart in his hands. Dust drifted through the flashlight beam while rain tapped softly against the windows. Then his hammer slipped farther than it should have. Instead of solid wood behind the panel, there was empty space. Ethan paused immediately. Old houses always hid things. Most of the time it was dead wiring or rodent nests, sometimes worse. He pulled away another section carefully until a narrow opening appeared between the studs. Cool air drifted out, carrying the smell of old paper and dry wood untouched for years. "Lily," he called quietly. "Flashlight." A few seconds later, she appeared wrapped in a blanket, Marmalade following beside her. "What did you find?" "Don't know yet." Ethan widened the opening enough to reach inside. His fingers brushed cardboard, then paper tubes, then something flat tied together with string. One by one, he pulled the items out onto the hallway floor. Old boxes, rolled blueprints, sketches, dozens of them. The paper had yellowed with age, edges brittle enough to tear if handled carelessly. Some drawings showed houses unlike anything built in Ashridge. Open spaces, strange curved windows, indoor gardens connected to living rooms. The designs felt decades ahead of the time they came from. Lily crouched beside him. "Did somebody hide these?" "Looks like it." Ethan carefully unrolled one of the larger blueprints. At the bottom corner was a faded signature. Elias Holloway. The name meant nothing to Lily, but Ethan recognized it immediately. He stared at the paper for several seconds before saying anything. Elias Holloway had once been a respected architect in Oregon back in the 1950s. Not famous, but known enough that architecture students still studied some of his early work. Then one day, he just disappeared from public life. No major projects after 1962, no interviews, nothing. And now Ethan was standing in a freezing hallway holding original drawings hidden inside the walls of a collapsing house. "Who's that?" Lily asked. Ethan looked around slowly at the old wood walls. "I think this used to be his house." That somehow made the place feel stranger. Like the house had been quietly waiting for someone to notice it again. Meanwhile, the nights on Cedar Hollow had started sounding different. At exactly 9 most evenings, piano music drifted from the neighboring house across the narrow side yard. Slow jazz mostly, soft enough that you had to stop talking to really hear it. The first few nights Ethan barely noticed. Lily noticed immediately. The house next door belonged to Noah Bennett, a man most people in Ashridge described using words like odd, quiet, or used to be somebody. Noah was 35, though years of drinking had added roughness to his face that made him seem older under certain light. He was lean, slightly unshaven most days, with tired blue eyes and dark hair always falling across his forehead like he forgot mirrors existed. He usually wore old sweaters with sleeves pushed to his elbows and carried himself with the restless energy of someone who slept badly. Years ago, Noah had played piano professionally in Portland jazz clubs before alcohol and a messy divorce wrecked most of his career. After his wife left, he moved back to Ashridge and barely spoke to anyone outside the grocery store cashier and the owner of Murphy's Bar downtown. But every night he still played piano, like muscle memory refusing to die. One evening, Lily wandered into his yard while he was sitting on the porch, smoking. Marmalade followed behind her through the snow. Noah looked startled at first. Kids almost never approached him. "You're the piano guy," Lily said, matter-of-factly. Noah blinked once. "That's probably the nicest thing anybody's called me in a while." Lily pointed toward the house. "Can you play the song from yesterday again?" Noah let out a short laugh through his nose. "You just walk up asking strangers for concerts." "Yeah?" Something about her honesty caught him off guard. A minute later, he opened the front door and waved her inside. Noah's house looked cleaner than Ethan expected, but emptier too. Bare walls, half-unpacked boxes, dusty records stacked beside the piano. The entire living room revolved around one massive black upright piano sitting near the window. Lily climbed onto the bench beside him while Marmalade explored the room. "What do you want to hear?" Noah asked. "The sad one." Noah smiled faintly. "Ah, my specialty." And honestly, it was probably the first time in years he played for somebody because he actually wanted to. Not for money, not for a crowd, just because somebody asked. Back at Cedar Hollow, Ethan stayed awake long after Lily fell asleep, sitting alone at the kitchen table with Elias Holloway's blueprints spread around him. Outside, snow slid softly off the roof. The old house creaked around him, and for the first time since buying it, Ethan started feeling something underneath all the exhaustion. Not hope exactly, something quieter than that. Curiosity. Like the house was slowly introducing itself. By early March, the house sounded different when you walked through it. Not fixed, not even close, but alive. The downstairs hallway no longer smelled entirely like mold. Ethan had replaced part of the damaged flooring near the staircase, patched sections of the ceiling, and somehow gotten the old furnace to cough out enough heat to survive the nights without wearing gloves indoors. Outside, winter in Ashridge was beginning to loosen its grip. Snow still covered parts of Cedar Hollow Road in the mornings, but rain had started replacing ice. Gutters dripped steadily through the afternoons. The whole town looked wet all the time. Ethan spent nearly every free hour working on the house now. Some nights he barely spoke. He'd come home exhausted from construction jobs, eat whatever cheap dinner he could throw together, then disappear upstairs with tools until long after Lily fell asleep. And somehow, despite how tired he constantly looked, he seemed more focused than before, like the house had given him something to chase. The blueprints from inside the wall stayed spread across the kitchen table almost every night. Ethan studied them the way other people studied maps before getting lost somewhere. Some designs matched parts of the house exactly. Others showed rooms that didn't seem to exist at all. That was what bothered him, especially one sketch of the upper floor. The dimensions didn't make sense. One section of the attic should have been larger than what physically existed, meaning there was empty space somewhere. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Ethan climbed into the attic carrying a flashlight, hammer, and tape measure while rain hammered steadily against the roof overhead. The attic smelled like old cedar and dust, thick enough to taste. Low beams crossed overhead, forcing him to crouch while moving deeper into the space. Marmalade followed him halfway up the stairs before deciding the attic was beneath him and turning around. Lily appeared a minute later wearing one of Ethan's oversized hoodies like a blanket. "You think there's a secret room?" "I think old rich people were weird," Ethan muttered while tapping carefully along the wall panels. Then he heard it. A hollow sound, different from the others. Ethan stopped immediately. The panel near the far corner looked newer than the surrounding wood, though newer probably still meant 40 years old. He slid his fingers along the edges until he found hidden nails beneath old paint. Lily's eyes widened. "Oh my God!" "Don't start saying that every 5 minutes," Ethan said automatically. "You found a secret room. This is literally a movie." The first panel came loose, slowly with a long crack of dry wood. Cold air drifted out from the darkness behind it. Then Ethan pulled the flashlight higher and froze. There was a room back there, not storage, not crawl space. An actual room, small but complete. Dust floated through the flashlight beam while the hidden space slowly revealed itself piece by piece. Shelves lined one wall filled with rolled drawings and stacked notebooks. Several unfinished paintings leaned against the corners beneath white sheets stained yellow with age. Near the window sat detailed miniature house models protected beneath cloudy glass covers. It looked less like storage and more like somebody had simply walked away one day and never returned. Lily stepped inside first, very slowly, like she was entering a church. "Whoa!" Ethan barely answered. He was staring at the walls. Every inch of them was covered with sketches, window designs, furniture layouts, handwritten notes, tiny phrases scribbled beside drawings in fading ink. Light matters more than space. People stay where they feel safe. A home should breathe with the people inside it. The room didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like time had stopped moving in there decades ago. Lily wandered toward the miniature models while Ethan carefully picked up one of the notebooks. Inside were pages filled with rough architectural sketches and personal observations written in narrow handwriting. Some pages looked almost obsessive. Entire paragraphs about sunlight angles inside kitchens. The emotional effect of ceiling height. How certain colors affected loneliness during winter. Ethan sat quietly flipping pages while rain continued pounding against the roof above them. Then Lily suddenly called from across the room. "Dad!" He looked up. She pointed toward a painting near the back wall, partially hidden beneath cloth. It showed the house itself, not exactly how it looked now. Warmer, full of plants, open windows, people sitting together inside the living room laughing while music played somewhere out of frame. At the bottom corner was a signature, Elias Holloway, and underneath it a sentence written carefully in black paint. A house is supposed to hold people together. A knock downstairs interrupted the silence. A few minutes later, Ethan opened the front door to find Lily's art teacher standing on the porch, holding a soaked umbrella. Sophia Hale was 29 years old and had the kind of quiet beauty people noticed slowly instead of immediately. She was slender, pale from spending too much time indoors, with dark auburn hair loosely tied behind her neck and tired green eyes that always seemed to look slightly distracted, like part of her attention lived somewhere else. She wore oversized sweaters, old boots covered in paint stains, and carried herself gently around people, especially children. Ashridge liked Sophia because she listened more than she talked, but there was sadness around her too. 2 years earlier, her mother passed away unexpectedly, and since then, Sophia had become even quieter. She still taught elementary school art classes during the day, but outside work she mostly kept to herself in a small apartment above the pharmacy downtown. "I'm sorry," she said awkwardly. "Lily left her sketchbook at school yesterday." Then she noticed the old blueprint sitting open on the kitchen table, and stopped speaking entirely. Her expression changed immediately. Not confusion, recognition. Sophia stepped closer, slowly. "Where did you get this?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Lily. "Inside the walls." Sophia stared at the signature at the bottom of the page for several seconds before sitting down quietly at the table. "That was my grandfather," she said softly. The room went still. Sophia explained everything over the next hour while rain rolled steadily down the windows. Elias Holloway wasn't just an architect. He'd been obsessed with the idea that homes could emotionally heal people. He designed spaces meant to reduce loneliness, encourage conversation, bring in natural light even during dark winters. He believed architecture should make people feel safe before impressive. Most investors thought he was unrealistic. Some thought he'd gone insane near the end of his career after becoming increasingly isolated. "He used to say houses remembered people," Sophia said quietly, while turning one of the old sketches over in her hands. Everybody thought he was crazy for talking like that. Lily looked upstairs toward the hidden room. "I like him." Sophia smiled for the first time since arriving. "So did I." Later that night, after Sophia left and rain finally stopped outside, Lily sat cross-legged inside the hidden room surrounded by old sketches and whispered, "This room feels like it's breathing." Ethan leaned quietly against the doorway, looking around at the unfinished paintings, the careful designs, the strange warmth hidden inside the old attic walls. And somewhere in that moment the house stopped feeling like survival. For the first time it started feeling like possibility. By the middle of April, the house on Cedar Hollow no longer looked abandoned. It still looked old, still crooked in certain places, still covered in mismatched paint and temporary repairs Ethan swore he'd fix properly later. The front porch leaned slightly, the upstairs hallway creaked loud enough to wake people at night, and if it rained too hard, one section near the kitchen window still dripped into a metal bucket Ethan kept forgetting to move. But the place felt different now, warmer, lived in. The windows stayed lit later into the evenings. Music drifted from inside some nights. The smell of coffee and sawdust replaced mold, and little by little people in Ashridge started slowing down when they drove past it. Not because it looked expensive, because it looked alive. Lily had started painting tiny things around the house without asking permission first. Small flowers near windowsills, birds hidden beside doorframes, tiny constellations across the upstairs ceiling above her bed. Ethan pretended to complain about it once until she pointed out he'd been staring at one of the paintings for almost 5 minutes. After that, he stopped complaining. Even Marmalade seemed healthier now. His orange fur finally looked clean instead of dusty, and he'd gained enough weight that Lily claimed he was becoming emotionally stable. The cat mostly spent his days sleeping in warm sunlight near the living room window or following Noah around next door, demanding food from multiple households like a professional criminal. Noah had started coming over almost every evening. At first, it was just to help move furniture or repair the old upright piano Ethan found covered beneath sheets inside the dining room. The piano had probably not been tuned since the early 1990s, and several keys stuck badly enough to sound broken. But Noah treated the instrument carefully, respectfully, like somebody handling an old injury. One evening, Ethan walked downstairs carrying lumber and stopped halfway when he heard music. Not from Noah's house, from his own. Noah sat at the piano beneath the soft yellow dining room light, while Lily lay upside down across the couch, listening dramatically with Marmalade asleep on her stomach. The music was slow jazz, warm, tired in places, beautiful anyway. Sophia sat nearby restoring one of Elias Holloway's damaged sketches using tiny brushes and careful movements. She looked different lately, less distant somehow. Her hair was tied messily above her shoulders, and paint smudges covered the sleeves of her sweater. The hidden attic room had become her second home, almost without anybody discussing it. Every few days she arrived carrying old restoration supplies, art books, or storage boxes for Elias's work. Sometimes she stayed for dinner without meaning to. Sometimes she and Ethan ended up talking quietly in the kitchen long after Lily fell asleep upstairs, mostly about houses, sometimes about grief. Sophia told him once that after her mother died, she stopped painting entirely for almost a year because every canvas reminded her of unfinished conversations. Ethan understood that immediately without needing explanation. Some losses changed the shape of everything afterward. A week later, something unexpected happened. A local blogger named Jenna Pike stopped outside Cedar Hollow while driving home from Portland. Jenna was 26, loud in the way social media slowly trains people to become loud, with short black hair dyed unevenly purple at the ends and giant glasses constantly sliding down her nose. She ran a small Oregon lifestyle page online where she posted coffee shops, old bookstores, abandoned buildings, and hidden cozy places across small towns nobody usually noticed. Ashridge barely registered on most maps. But Jenna loved places that looked forgotten, and the house on Cedar Hollow caught her attention immediately, not because it looked perfect, because it didn't. The crooked porch lights, the painted windows, the piano visible through the dining room, plants growing inside old chipped ceramic mugs near the front steps. It looked human in a way most renovated houses didn't anymore. Jenna posted photos online that night with the caption, "Found the coziest half-broken house in Oregon, and honestly I never wanted to leave." By the next afternoon, thousands of people had shared it. Then more photos appeared. People started driving past the house just to look at it. Some stopped to take pictures. Others slowed down so long Ethan worried somebody would eventually hit the mailbox. Ashridge reacted the way small towns always react when something random becomes popular online. Half the town became proud immediately. The other half became suspicious. Madeline Carter saw the photos 3 days later while sitting inside the real estate office downtown. At first, she genuinely thought it was a different house. Then she recognized the windows and the porch and the old cedar tree leaning near the sidewalk. She stared at the screen for several seconds before muttering quietly, "No way." That afternoon she drove to Cedar Hollow herself. The house looked completely different from the one she sold Ethan in January. Not richer, not polished, just loved. Madeline stood across the street watching Lily chase Marmalade through the yard while Noah carried sheet music inside and Ethan repaired part of the porch railing beneath warm afternoon sunlight. None of it made logical sense to her. The property value technically hadn't changed much. The neighborhood was still average. The house still needed work. So why did people suddenly care about it? That question bothered her more than she expected. Meanwhile, Noah received a phone call that same week from Murphy's Bar downtown. The owner, Vince Moreno, had heard through somebody that Noah was playing again. Vince was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with permanent cigarette damage in his voice and the tired patience of someone who'd owned the same jazz bar for 30 years. He'd known Noah since his Portland days and had watched his career collapse slowly from a distance. "We got live music Friday," Vince said over the phone. "People still ask about you sometimes." Noah almost said no immediately. After hanging up, he sat alone on the porch for nearly 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Then Lily sat beside him holding a peanut butter sandwich. "You should go," she said. Noah rubbed his face tiredly. "Kid, I haven't played in public for years. You play here all the time. That's different." "Why?" Noah opened his mouth, then stopped. Lily looked back toward the house where soft piano music still drifted faintly through the open dining room window. And then she said quietly, "I think the house likes hearing you play." Something in Noah's expression changed right then, very small, but real. Like a man remembering a version of himself he thought was already gone. That night, long after everybody else fell asleep, Noah sat alone at the piano inside the Cedar Hollow house, while rain moved softly against the windows outside. And for the first time in years, he started practicing seriously again. The storm arrived on a Thursday night near the end of October. Ashridge had been under weather warnings all afternoon, but people in town were used to storms. Oregon storms came every year: heavy rain, strong wind, power outages lasting a few hours. Nobody expected anything unusual, but around 9 that night the wind changed. Ethan noticed it first while tightening loose plastic over part of the porch railing outside. The air suddenly felt wrong. Warmer than it should have been, fast-moving. The trees along Cedar Hollow bent hard enough to creak. Then the rain started. Not normal rain, sheets of it, the kind that erased the streetlights completely. Inside the house, windows rattled violently while water hammered against the roof overhead. The old structure groaned with every strong gust. Pipes knocked somewhere behind the walls. Upstairs, doors shifted slightly in their frames. Lily sat curled on the couch with marmalade held tightly against her chest, while Noah stood near the front window watching branches whip across the street. "This roof's not going to like this," Noah muttered. Ethan already knew. For weeks he'd been trying to save enough money to replace the eastern side completely before winter arrived, but every repair inside the house uncovered 3 more problems underneath it. Old homes were like that. They never broke one thing at a time. By 10:30, part of the ceiling upstairs had already started leaking. Sophia helped Ethan move boxes of Elias Holloway's sketches and notebooks away from the worst areas, while thunder rolled across Ashridge hard enough to shake the windows. Sophia looked pale even by candlelight. Storms made her nervous. Ethan noticed the way she flinched every time the house creaked loudly overhead. Later, she quietly admitted her mother died during a winter highway accident in heavy rain. Since then, storms always brought the same feeling back. Outside, tree branches scraped violently across the roof. Then came the sound, a deep crack overhead. Everybody froze instantly. And 1 second later, part of the attic roof collapsed. The noise shook the entire house. Wood splintered. Rain exploded downward through the ceiling. Water poured directly into the hidden attic room. Sophia gasped. Ethan was already moving before the dust settled. He ran upstairs 2 steps at a time, while freezing rain blew through the broken roof above. The hidden room looked destroyed within seconds. Water-soaked paintings stacked against the walls. Sketches floated across the floor. One of Elias Holloway's miniature house models shattered after falling from a shelf. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, helplessly watching months of restoration work disappear under muddy rainwater. And honestly, it broke something inside him a little. Not because of the house itself, because for the first time in years he had started believing he might actually be building something again. Noah grabbed tarps from downstairs while Sophia desperately gathered soaked drawings into dry boxes. Lily appeared at the doorway crying quietly, while Marmalade hissed at the thunder behind her. "Lily," Ethan said firmly, "downstairs, right now." She didn't argue. That was how scared she was. By morning, the storm had moved east, leaving Ashridge covered in broken branches and flooded streets. Part of Cedar Hollow lost power completely. The eastern side of Ethan's roof looked half peeled open. Rainwater dripped steadily through the attic into metal buckets downstairs. The house suddenly felt fragile again. Like all the warmth they built over the past months had been temporary. 3 days later, Ethan drove downtown wearing his only decent jacket and applied for a repair loan at First Valley Credit Union. The loan officer was a man named Richard Bellamy, late 50s, thin grey moustache, perfectly combed hair, the kind of banker who spoke gently while delivering bad news. He wasn't cruel, just careful in the way financially cautious people become after decades of hearing desperate stories. Richard reviewed Ethan's paperwork for less than 10 minutes before sighing quietly. "I'm sorry," he said. "Your debt-to-income ratio just isn't strong enough." Ethan stared at the desk silently. Outside the office window, rainwater still dripped from the streets. "We can maybe revisit things in 6 months," Richard added carefully. 6 months. Ethan almost laughed at that. The roof barely had 6 days. By the time he drove back to Cedar Hollow, exhaustion sat so heavily on him he could barely think clearly anymore. He parked outside the house and just stayed in the truck for several minutes, staring at the damaged roof. Then he noticed people outside. Noah was unloading lumber from an old pickup truck. Sophia stood beside the porch, carrying paint-sealed storage containers full of restored drawings. And there were others too. Neighbors, people from town. A retired electrician named Walter Green had shown up carrying tools before anybody even called him. Walter was 71, broad and heavy-set with permanently grease-stained hands and hearing aids he constantly complained about. He spent 40 years fixing electrical systems around Ashridge and treated every repair project like a military operation. Behind him, 2 high school kids Ethan vaguely recognized were hauling shingles from a trailer. Then Ethan noticed Madeline Carter standing near the mailbox. She looked deeply uncomfortable holding a cardboard tray of coffees in expensive boots completely unsuited for mud. Ethan blinked once. "You lost?" Noah asked dryly from the porch. Madeline ignored him. She walked toward Ethan slowly, arms crossed against the cold wind. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she looked up at the damaged roof and shook her head slightly. "I really did think you were insane buying this place," she admitted quietly. Ethan let out a tired breath through his nose. "Yeah, a lot of people did." Madeline looked toward the house where people now moved in and out carrying supplies, then toward the street where cars kept slowing down beside Cedar Hollow, and something in her expression softened for the first time since Ethan met her. "But honestly," she said, "maybe this town needed somebody like you." The sentence caught Ethan off guard more than he expected. Not because it sounded dramatic, because Madeline Carter was not the kind of person who said things she didn't mean. The repairs lasted all day, then another after that. Noah disappeared for almost an entire afternoon and returned without explanation, carrying envelopes full of cash. Later, Ethan found out Noah had sold his old saxophone, the one expensive thing he'd kept from his music career. Sophia quietly contributed part of the inheritance money her mother left her, despite Ethan arguing against it. "You gave my grandfather back to me," she told him simply. "Let me help save his house." And somehow, piece by piece, the house survived again. That evening, after the rain finally stopped completely, Ethan and Lily sat together on the front porch, wrapped in blankets while the wet streets of Ashridge reflected soft yellow streetlights. The air smelled like rain-soaked cedar and fresh wood. Inside the house, Noah played piano quietly, while voices drifted softly through open windows. Lily leaned against Ethan's shoulder. Then she asked, very quietly, "Do you think Mum would have liked this house?" Ethan looked out at the dark street for a long moment before answering. And when he finally spoke, his voice sounded softer than it had in months. "Yeah," he said. "I think she would have loved this place." By the time spring finally reached Ash Ridge, people had stopped calling it that broken house on Cedar Hollow. Now they called it the Hollow House. Nobody really remembered who started the name first. Maybe Jenna Pike online, maybe some kid at school, maybe Noah after one too many late-night piano sessions. Either way, it stuck, and honestly it fit. The house no longer belonged only to Ethan and Lily. It belonged a little to everybody now. The rain finally disappeared sometime in March, and warmth slowly returned to the town. Cedar trees behind the property turned green again. The old flower beds near the porch, dead all winter, suddenly started growing wild without anyone touching them. Windows stayed open longer. Music carried farther through the evenings. Inside, the house had become something impossible to explain properly. Part coffee shop, part library, part art studio, part music room. But mostly it became a place people wanted to stay longer than they planned. Ethan never officially decided to turn it into anything. It just happened. One person stopped by with coffee beans from Portland. Someone else donated old bookshelves. Noah dragged over extra chairs from Murphy's Bar one weekend. Sophia started hanging restored paintings from Elias Holloway around the downstairs walls, and suddenly strangers were showing up asking questions about the artist. Then kids from the neighborhood started coming after school. Then parents, then more people. By April, there were evenings when 15 or 20 people filled the downstairs rooms talking quietly beneath warm yellow lights while Noah played piano near the dining room window. The strange part was how natural it all felt. Like the house had always wanted this. Ethan built shelves along one wall near the fireplace using leftover wood from repairs. Soon they filled with donated books from people around town. Old novels, children's books, poetry collections. Someone even dropped off a box of vinyl records beside the piano with a note that simply read, "This place feels like it needs music." Sophia eventually opened a small public exhibit upstairs featuring Elias Holloway's restored sketches and paintings. The first night she displayed them, she almost cancelled twice from nerves. Sophia hated attention, always had. She moved carefully through life, spoke softly, avoided crowded spaces whenever possible. Losing her mother years earlier made her retreat even further inward, like grief had permanently lowered the volume of the world around her. But that night, standing beneath soft attic lights while strangers quietly admired her grandfather's work, something shifted in her. People understood it. Not all of it, but enough. One older woman cried while looking at a painting of sunlight pouring through a kitchen window. Another man stood silently reading Elias's handwritten notes for nearly 20 minutes. Afterward, Sophia sat downstairs at the kitchen counter, holding coffee in both hands while Ethan cleaned brushes nearby. "He would have liked this," she said quietly. Ethan glanced toward the attic ceiling. "Yeah," he answered. "I think he would have." Meanwhile, Noah slowly became himself again. Not the younger version from Portland, not the drunk version either, just Noah. He started playing weekends at Murphy's Bar again every Friday night. At first, people came mostly out of curiosity. By the second month, they came because he was genuinely good, really good. The kind of piano player who made entire rooms quieter without asking them to be. Vince Moreno eventually joked that Noah was single-handedly saving his business. "You disappear for 5 years and suddenly everybody wants sad jazz again," Vince complained one night while counting receipts behind the bar. Noah smirked faintly. "Depression's timeless." But even while playing downtown again, Noah always came back to Cedar Hollow afterward, because somewhere along the way, that house became home too. And Ethan? Ethan changed in ways harder to notice at first. He laughed more now, slept better, stopped checking his bank account every night before bed like he was preparing for disaster. One afternoon, Lily caught him humming while repairing shelves in the living room and stared at him dramatically. "What?" he asked. "You used to be sad all the time." Ethan leaned against the ladder quietly for a second. Then he smiled a little. "Yeah," he admitted. "I know." The Hollow House became the kind of place people described to friends using phrases like, "You just have to see it." Tourists occasionally drove through Ashridge now because of online posts. Some stayed for coffee and music. Others donated books or paintings before leaving. One couple from Seattle mailed Ethan a handmade sign that now hung near the porch steps. "Welcome to the Hollow House." Even Madeline Carter started stopping by occasionally. Usually under fake excuses, dropping off documents, checking zoning permits, bringing pastries nobody asked for. One afternoon she stood inside the crowded living room watching people talk beneath Elias Holloway's paintings while children ran upstairs laughing. Then she looked toward Ethan. "I sold luxury homes for 15 years, she said quietly. "None of them ever felt like this." Ethan didn't know how to answer that, because honestly, neither did he. Then near the beginning of May, everything shifted again. A black SUV arrived outside Cedar Hollow just after noon. Out stepped a man named Daniel Mercer, tall, mid-40s, perfect grey coat despite the dusty road, calm, expensive smile. The kind of man who shook hands like every conversation was already a business negotiation. Daniel represented Westvale Development Group, a Portland company buying property across small Oregon towns preparing for tourism expansion. He walked through the house slowly while people drank coffee nearby, and Noah played softly in the next room. When Daniel finally sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table, he placed a folder down carefully. "We'd like to purchase the property," he said simply, "not just the house, the surrounding land too." The number inside the folder was enough to completely change Ethan and Lily's lives, enough for college, security, a real future, enough to never worry about bills again. But there was one condition. Westvale planned to redevelop the entire block. The Hollow House would be demolished. That night, Ethan stood alone outside on the porch, long after everyone else had gone home. Soft music drifted from inside. Laughter followed it. Warm yellow light spilled across the yard while Lily slept upstairs at the table beside half-finished drawings, and marmalade curled against her arm. Sophia stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one quietly. Then she leaned beside him against the porch railing. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Sophia looked toward the glowing windows of the house and asked softly, "So? Are you going to sell it?" Ethan stared at the house for a long moment, at the lights, the music, the life inside it. Then slowly, almost to himself, he smiled, and the story ended there. Sometimes people think a home is just wood, walls, money, or property value. But this story reminds us that a real home is the place where people heal. Ethan bought that house because it was the only thing he could afford. But in the end, it gave him something money couldn't buy back: hope, community, purpose, and the feeling of being alive again. A broken place can still become something beautiful when people choose not to give up on it. And honestly, the same thing is true for people too. Maybe somebody watching this right now feels tired. Maybe life hasn't gone the way you planned. Maybe you feel like something inside you has been broken for a long time. But just because something looks damaged doesn't mean there's no value left inside it. Sometimes the most beautiful things begin the moment people stop running away and decide to rebuild. If this story touched your heart even a little, share it with someone who might need it today. And let me know in the comments, if you were Ethan, would you sell the house? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for more stories like this. And before you go, if you believe God can still restore broken things, comment Amen below. May God bless you, protect your family, bring peace to your home, and remind you that even after the hardest storms, light can still return.